Thanks a lot for joining us on this session. We've had a insightful day when we talk about sustainability. We've had some sessions about circular economy, some about later in the day we'll have some about inclusion and diversity. Now here we are discussing the most important topic when we talk about sustainability is the scope 3 emissions, and we have a room full of CSOs, so we know how important these are. Globally, 70 to 80% of carbon footprint is scope 3 emissions. And when we talk about scope 3 emissions, these are very hard to track and tackle because of the nature of these because of the nature of this challenge. When we talk about scope 1 and 2 emissions, these are directly or indirectly controlled by the organizations themselves, but scope 3 emissions are outside the organization's control. They're either responsible to the supplier or the end user, which is the consumer. So in order to track or tackle the whole value chain, or the business model has to be tracked. Without further ado, let me just come to the first question, which is what is the scenario here in India when we talk about scope 3 emissions? What is holding India back? Let me address that to Mr. Pherwani. Mr. Pherwani, tell us what is the scenario here like in India when we talk about scope 3 emissions? What do you think will be the benefits and challenges when we talk about scope 3 emissions and tackling them?
Thank you for having me here. This is a very important aspect when we talk about business greenness, or making sure that entire business is green. In totality, in sustainability, you have to see it from the lens of from where my ingredients or my input is coming to where my approach is up to the customer, or up to the level where product impact or my services impacts are there. So from that perspective, in toto, the wholesomeness of the sustainability is playing a major role, which is like indirect emission has a significant footprint. And that's something which I have seen in last 5 years. There is a transition. People started looking out beyond the fence and looking upstream and downstream in terms of how my footprint look like, how I impact the world, and how world is impacting me, vice versa. So as you saw the data which Minia was showing in the morning, only 22% of the 200 companies are reporting scope 3 data. And that too, if you dice the data, you will realize 50% of them are not even reporting the entire spectrum of scope 3. So that's another challenge. Now the remaining who is reporting, they are having a challenge with respect to people, processes, technology, and regulation. And this is something which is holding each and every company or organization to report this in a transparent manner. And that's the reason every year you will see if what they report in the previous year, and as per my experience also in the previous company, the next year the base changes, the data reporting structure changes, the scoping changes, and numbers also vary. So these are some of the challenges which I see, and I'll ask other fellow team members to also explain what are the key challenges where each and every company is getting held in terms of scope 3.
Mr. Gurudanti, what about you? What do you think the scenario here is like in India, and what are the challenges that you feel like?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And first of all, let me apologize. I'm a couple of minutes late. The reason was one of the challenge because I was interacting with a customer. So when we talk about scope 3, as Mr. Pherwani rightly said, it's about overall value chain. A good number of categories, 8 categories are upstream, and rest of the categories are downstream. So there are a lot of stakeholders at play, a lot of expectations to manage, and of course a lot of parameters to actually talk to. So just now, as I was saying, I was talking to a customer for whom the major point of concern, or the major point when they were coming to the meeting, was how much revenue can I increase with my organization? And with that, from there we have to take it slowly to talk about this is your scope 3 attribution to us. Are you calculating your GHGs? Can you reduce your GHGs? Actually, the biggest challenge what I face is talking and telling the whole story to a large set of stakeholders, and then making them realize that this is something which is possible. Don't just back out. Don't just say that it is too huge. It is not my cup of tea. Let us just go away. It is something which can be done. Scope 3 of my organization is scope 1 and 2 of other organizations. As they realize that, As the value chain realizes that, then scope 3 reduction can be possible.
Right. Mr. Singh?
This indeed is a very apt question. I think over the years, most of the organizations have kind of focused on scope 1 and scope 2. And somewhere in India, I think scope 3 has taken a backseat. In fact, right now, except companies like who are in steel, cement, or probably aluminum manufacturing, scope 3 constitutes almost 65 to 90% of the emissions being generated in Indian companies. In fact, I think the nomenclature of scope 3 should be scope 1 in India, because this constitutes the major emissions factor in India right now. And one of the challenges in India is that basically there's lack of data. Most of the suppliers who are considered to be tier 1 are quite far and few. Most of the companies have a database of suppliers in tier 2 and tier 3 category, where the data collection is a challenge. The other challenge is capacity building. In fact, at Havells, we conducted an ESG session with the suppliers just a couple of weeks back. Although most of them were quite inquisitive and actually were quite encouraged to adopt this new era of carbon emissions. However, I felt that there's a lot of capacity building which needs to be given the suppliers, which is missing right now. And I think maybe the next few months, I think a lot of capacity building at a company level, at a supplier level, needs to be given so that this thing is taken up seriously across the value chain. In fact, decarbonizing the supply chain, if it happens, will be the single most saver of emissions, I think, in the entire value chain.
Right. Dr. Panigrahi, what are the benefits of doing so, making a green supply chain and reducing scope 3 emissions?
Absolutely. See, I'm a big proponent of sustainability as a profit center. And I've seen in my journey of 27 plus years, in last 2-3 years, we have taken sustainability so seriously. But before that, when we were working in this field in different companies, we have pushed the agenda mainly from the cost point of view. So you implement projects, you implement decarbonization projects or waste projects or water projects, you directly get, you directly add to the bottom line. So I think that's the first premise. And it is absolutely possible that you push the agenda of sustainability or even scope 3, and then you at the end of the day, it gets added to the bottom line. In L&T, we have more than 50,000 suppliers only in construction sector, and more than 1 lakh. It's a massive kind of organization, massive. Still, we are able to track at least 90-95% of our scope 3, and we do it very diligently, taking all aspects into account, the material aspects, the inbound logistics and things like that. And while the scope 3 scenario looks very, very difficult, in fact, some of the global reports says that 90% of the companies are not able to report because it's very complex. But at the same time, if you just look at it as a opportunity point of view, you can do a lot of things. So I think what is the crux of the whole thing is that you look this as an opportunity, not as a problem or not as a cost based initiative. No. So I think if you just change your perspective, a lot of things will change. So I think going ahead, a lot of companies will follow these examples. And now international frameworks, European frameworks, even our BRSR is going to drive a lot of change. So we look forward to that happening.
Right, changing the lens and seeing it as an opportunity, absolutely. Mr. Verma, you are from you're from SunSource Energy, and we see that scope 2 and scope 3 energy overlaps between scope 3 and scope 3. How do you see this scope 3 challenge?
From a perspective of a power developer, one of the largest challenges we come across, a lot of multinational organizations who are maybe in India totally 100% subcontracting is done through their sub-suppliers. I mean, you talk about textile, you talk about automotive. I mean, most of these companies have their supplier. You talk about bottling plants. I mean, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola. So all of these have their large, maybe manufacturers who are bottling for them, who are manufacturing apparels for them. At times, the challenge with us is, from a power developer perspective, I see is it is very difficult to do projects for some of the sub-suppliers because they're not, I mean, credit rating is not that good that their projects can be funded. Especially in some of the industries, we come across maybe subcontractors or manufacturers which are at layer 2, layer 3, tier 2, tier 3. So either they would not have any credit rating with them. When we go to lenders, lenders are not ready to support them. So when we go back to the principal companies and ask about supporting them in terms of, say, corporate guarantees or any other kind of guarantees, it becomes challenging because ultimately there are multiple balance sheets. I mean, nobody would like to, say, get a 50, 100 megawatt kind of project requirement done on, maybe supported through their balance sheet, and that power going to maybe some subcontractors. So with that perspective, I see there is a challenge, but then I do also see a solution. I mean, some of the companies like Amazon have been very, I would say, aggressive in that approach. What they have done is they are looking at the new instruments like virtual PPAs. Now with virtual PPAs, they're buying about 400 megawatt. So developers like us, we are developing merchant capacity plants. So we would sell the green credits, the green attributes to Amazon, which they would use for themselves, their, I mean, warehouses, their suppliers, a lot of them. Yeah. So that is their duty. So that's how they are going to manage. And now with respect to power, since they are merchant capacity plants, you need to get into a virtual PPA kind of contract where we would sell that power at, say, exchange. But now selling the power exchange doesn't allow the investor to invest into the projects because that is not consistent. So what do we do? In such case, Amazon, what has they have done is there are CFD contracts which are happening. So if you are selling, so the developer would get their fixed X generator busbar price. Any excess or deficiency would be, I mean, taken care by either of these parties. So that is happening outside Europe, USA, that is a norm. In our country, what has happened is that has moved from maybe to now securities exchange, stock exchange. So those regulations have still not come. So PPAs on their own are happening bilateral between the companies, and they are agreeing. Amazon was able to do it. They took that risk of selling brown power on exchange. But otherwise, if it is bilateral between two companies, such kind of arrangement needs to be pushed and encouraged. Yeah.
Mr. Kiran, you represent the pharmaceutical industry, and we also have Mr. Gurudanti from the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceuticals also is responsible for 5% of global scope 3 emissions. What do you think is the challenge in India when you think about scope 3?
So the main challenge is lack of awareness for the suppliers. So since last 3 years, we have done assessments for the suppliers, and if I assess it from this thing is, most of the companies, they don't know how to calculate the scope 3 these things. Second thing is what tool to be used, what kind of GHT tool to be used. That's what the main second one we have identified. And third one, commitment from the respective management itself. The right persons not nominated also, when we have conducted capacity building also, they have nominated few departments where they don't have knowledge to understand also. So these are the challenges we are facing it. But they are ready if you give any solutions for them, like if you give a proper tool for them, if you give the right materials, if you share the best practices with them, they are trying to implement it with a proper CAPA. They are in the process of improving it.
Okay. Let's talk about the measurement challenge now, Mr. Gurudanti. How can companies effectively measure and reduce their scope 3?
Measurement of scope 3, so as we know, there are 15 different categories. The first step is to actually understand what kind of categories will be applicable for the company. Different categories are not applicable for different companies due to different reasons. When coming to calculation, the best way out is to actually ask the supplier what the attribution is. But then coming to the same point again, that not all suppliers know how to calculate. So the attribution method comes in from the spend from the intensities. If they have their intensities, well and good. If they don't have the intensities, then there are emission factors available. Calculation based on that, it's an approximation, it's a guesstimate. But the one thing which a good sustainability team would do is actually revise on those estimations, revise on the guesstimations as you know. Get proper emission factors. There are environmentally enhanced input-output factors which are available from US, from UK, from Japan. I think India is also coming up with these. The LCIA database is trying to bring up emission factors which are more relevant for Indian industry. But of course, pharma wouldn't be at the first. The first would be cement, then automobile and other things which are contributing a lot to the emissions. But then while it comes, revise your emission factors as much as possible. Get proper attributions from the suppliers as much as possible. Once we know who are the critical suppliers from scope 3 side, then we can start talking with them. And for them also, it makes more sense that we talk with them because the share in the pie is larger.
Mr. Singh?
So I think I agree with my fellow panel member. I think one of the first steps should be identification of the sector in which they are working. Unfortunately, the regulations which have come right now is not sector focused, and that is one of the challenges which most of the suppliers are facing right now. I'm sure this is a learning phase for all of us, and in the years to come by, or probably in the months to come by, this should be addressed. The other thing I think, as one of my fellow members said, that there's a lot of lack of awareness among the suppliers as well. In fact, when we were having this capacity building sessions with the suppliers, they were not even aware what greenhouse gas emissions are, and I'm talking about these are tier 1 suppliers. So that's the scary part. I mean, we can understand that maybe the unorganized sectors are not aware, but even the tier 1 suppliers are not aware. Reason being, probably scope 3 has taken a backseat, as I was mentioning earlier. I mean, I'm from a risk management background, so I take consequence management more positively. I think there should be some positive fear. I'm not saying from negative connotation standpoint, but till the time we don't make it a consequence that if this does not happen, this will happen. I think unfortunately in India, the mindset is that probably it will take a backseat. I think in the last panel, I really appreciated one of the panel members who mentioned that the customer should start demanding these emission norms. And I think in the years to come by, I'll not be surprised the way the calorie or the nutrition value are mentioned in the product. I think the emission norms may also be a prerequisite for any company when they are rolling out their SKUs or products. This is the way to go about, I think, in the future, in the near future.
Right. Mr. Dr. Pani,
Yeah, sure. You see, I think what is required is two approaches. One is, you need to handhold people. Right? You need to handhold companies on understanding the subject and also doing the, real measurement of scope 3 or whatever. Rather, they are scope 1 and scope 2. Some of your suppliers might be bigger than you, right? So you don't need to do anything. But some of the suppliers, or rather majority of the suppliers are smaller than you. There are many SME suppliers. They don't have any clue of what is happening. Everybody is talking about climate change, decarbonization, scope 1, scope 2, but they don't understand, right? So you have to handhold them. And also, I think to a great extent, we have to use tool-based solutions. How do you automate your data capturing? And how do you, make it simple, or how do you simplify so that, this doesn't create another threat to the company, right? So I think a multi-pronged approach of, understanding the supply chain, a little bit of empathizing, little bit of handholding, and also, you can't mandate something, right? You may be mandated by somebody else, but you can't mandate it. Tomorrow, what will happen? You mandate it and the supply chain will vanish. Only you will have problem, right? So I think it's important that you handhold them and give proper training. I think one of the co-panelists was mentioning was training program. We conduct, very focused training program on supply chain. We tell them what is scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, how do we measure, how do we monitor, Also, we have deployed something called Sustainable Supply Chain Assessment Questionnaire, SSAQ, and we have monitored top 25 of our suppliers. That helps us a lot in understanding the supply chain. Also, we have monitored top 50 of the suppliers chain in terms of whether they are green or not, whether they are actually looking at the greenness, which is a little hazy. But again, we try to understand top 50 suppliers. This year, we want to roll it down to top 150 suppliers, and that will, cater to almost 60% of our buying, total buying volume. So, I think it is important that you understand the entire supply chain, even if the number is very, very high, and then take an approach of how do you take phase by phase. Top 25, top 50, top 100, top 150. If you do top 200, 300, maybe you are covering 70 to 80%. So I think that's the approach you have to take. Yeah.
Mr. Verma, we've had the panelists have talked about accountability, consequences, what is the challenge there in terms of how can you monitor effectively your supply chain? Can you set accountability? Is there regulation required there? What is the need?
See, the ultimate way to handle this is through collaboration only. Because anything which is not covered in scope 1 and 2 is everything else comes in scope 3. So scope is huge. Any upstream activity, downstream activity, right from employee commute to business travel there are a lot of things. IT companies and financial companies, who are just issuing loans to oil and gas companies who are working then on various operations, and that funding is used for those operations. So traceability and trackability is very complex. But however, I believe that with maybe principal companies collaborating, incentivizing their suppliers, that is one way. And secondly, ultimately right now it is all voluntary, scope 3. But when it becomes, you are mandated, ultimately the people who want to remain in business are those who would be able to manage that. So one way is incentivizing your supplier. Second way is also telling him probably if you don't, step up, you might lose this business to somebody else, some other supplier in future. Yeah. So with that, I would say stick and carrot kind of policy and collaborative policy, it would work. And what I also see is if you start doing that, there would come out a lot of, innovative ways of doing business, and which increases your business scope also. The way today you are doing business, whether you are using sustainable material, logistics, you are maybe managing a lot of things where probably you are using, say, electric vehicles to transport your, manage your logistics. So all those things, if you push and probably force, and maybe your suppliers also understand that's the way they need to do it, we will definitely find a solution.
Right. Mr. Kiran, when we talk about supply chain, everyone across sectors after the pandemic, they are trying to build sustainable and resilient supply chains. At the same time, they're also trying to cut costs. When you're trying to build resilient supply chains and also trying to cut costs, how do you put sustainability forward?
Here, one thing is when we really implement sustainability programs, I've seen there will be definitely cost effectiveness, cost savings will be there. So if it is made clear for our suppliers who are these are the benefits you will get it, definitely they are going to implement it. And we do have experience also. Initially, they have this resistant to change kind of thing. But when we explain them how they are going to get benefits and everything with the case studies, sharing of practices, in fact, we have seen improvements from them also. But it will take time, but they have improved. In fact, some of our suppliers, they got a better EcoVadis sustainability rating than us. So there are suppliers who have done well, and they are trying to improve it also. But as co-panelists said, we have to give a clear cut what they need to be doing, and best practices should be shared with them. So that is how they can be a part, and the best way is collaboration. Collaboration internal and external. First of all, internal is very, very important. When we want to implement anything, first of all, handling our own SCM departments is a challenge. They don't want to change themselves. They want to continue the same way. They are worried that if we implement these kind of best initiatives, the cost will go up or else the suppliers will not come forward. Changing them itself is a challenge. If we crack that, if we collaborate with them, then ultimately they should be accountable to take it to the suppliers. That is how things have improved and it will work also.
Right. Mr. Pherwani, how big of a challenge talent is in this sustainability challenge, do you think?
I think this is the biggest. We all have realized that capability is the issue within the fence and beyond the fence. Do my CEO know what is scope 3? That the story starts from there. The moment he realized we are in the middle of the crisis, emerging risk is a climate risk, and we have a window of only 12 years. If we don't do anything by 2040, we all are dead. We all know, all scientific evidences are indicating in that direction, and that's how we say science-based target. We talk about, infusing budget, resources, CSOs, team, functional resources, collaboration, team, this conference, and then after that another conference. So my only submission here is that awareness is the key. 60% of the effort in scope 3 is awareness, competency building, creating sustainability ambassador, series of ambassadors who are going to talk about this vocally at every platform, and then making sure there is a mandate which is coming in terms of a black and white. Scope 3 has only 2 types of suppliers. It's very clear. My direct suppliers who are dependent on me 100%, and there are complex suppliers who are metrics supplying to me as well as to someone else. If I am the CEO and if I want the world to be greener because of the impact which I am creating, my mandate has to be signed up on the day one. My direct suppliers have to go for this. This is the way I am going. They have to also follow the same course. And for that, whatever it takes, building capability to infusing the fund, and as you said, collaborating like the Maison do, I'll use all my horses on ground to make sure that they become green. Wherever there is a complexity or there is a cross-net suppliers, there should be some window to be given to them. You do it or you will die. And end of the day, supplier understand the language of money. And that's how they exist. Irrespective of how small the supplier is. The moment uske पेट पे लात पड़ेगी, the person will definitely work in the direction of being green. But the focus has to come from the top. And in this entire aspect, what plays a key role is awareness. And that has to start now. If not now, it would never be coming in play, and we will keep talking about they can't do it, they are small, they are marginalized, they are poor, how they will do it. They will never be able to do it. Trust me. It's a responsibility of big players to step up the game, show them a path, and make sure it is like in 2 pieces, black and white. There is nothing in between here and there, grey. Okay, आप 10 साल बाद कर लेना, 2070 का target set कर लेना. By the time world will not be there, who will see 2017? Will you be here to see the 2070, how the world will look like? We all see the brood of the bunch in terms of 2040 is going to be the hottest and worst year in our life. So capability, competency, awareness, these are the keys which we have to use to unlock the greener world which we are aspiring to be in.
Absolutely. Mr. Singh, with all these parameters and that Mr. Pherwani mentioned, technology is also one thing which is aiding this or making this road easier for companies to travel and take on this challenge. What are some of the emerging technologies that you think are helping right now or your company is using?
So that's a very relevant question. So in fact, at Havells, we have already explored a lot of tools because I think with the large supplier base that we have in Indian companies, it's not possible that manually we track the gas emissions. There has to be a science behind it. And luckily, there are various standards available basis which scope 3 can be tracked, be it spend basis, be it actual emission basis, because I think one of the challenges which all of us are facing is the actual data. It is so complex that no one is tracking the actual data. Technology is as good as the information which can be fed into the whatever technology we use. But right now, I think this year's, we call it zero-based budgeting. I think this year, probably all of us should try to standardize the data, get the data in order so that technology can be used. Unfortunately, in India right now, I think the way the data is so staggered in scope 3 emissions, I think no technology or tool right now can track the scope 3 emissions to the actual. It can only be a guesstimate, which I think all of us right now are doing. But because I think globally a lot of tools are already available. It's just that the data needs to be there. And I'm sure that in the months to come by, this will be probably done. Probably I'll just give one correlation. Probably it's just a mindset problem. Whenever we're discussing, we say that we are a generation which is afraid of both from our parents as well as children. Similarly, I think in India, we are afraid of both the vendors as well as customers. If the customer is asking something from us, we, stretch ourselves and give that. Having said that, if we asking vendors, we probably assume that, "Arey, vendor kaise dega? There are some issues, probably he'll choose other customer." I think that's a mindset which we need to change. Once that mindset has changed, I think a lot of things will fall in place.
Absolutely. Collecting the clean data, standardizing it, and then leveraging technology forward. Let me come to you, Dr. Panigrahi. Sorry. So, what is the role of government here? What policies do you need? What policies does industry need to, mitigate Scope 3 emissions?
Absolutely. I think that's a good question. While we all struggle about deploying the activities or actions on the sites or in subfloors, what is not very clear is what is the policy on, let us say, Scope 3? What is policy on Scope 1 or Scope 2? We follow all the international protocols, right? Today, those protocols are also not, they're in evolving stage. Now, this GHG protocol is, they're refining it. They will change it maybe in the next 6 months or so. The new protocols will come. But transferring that protocols or, learning from the international best practices, making a policy which is India-centric, I think that is what is not there as of now. Probably it will change in next couple of years, probably new policies will come. We're waiting for that. But BRSR, to some extent, although it is a framework and it is a mandate from SEBI, that is helping a lot in deploying your ideas or your plan, your actions. I think coherent to BRSR, there should be some clear-cut policies and guidelines which will help the industries to
absolutely
deploy. Yeah.
Mr. Verma, your views on it?
Yeah, so in terms of government policies, there needs to be very clear picture about what is the baseline. Now, especially with respect to Scope 3, nobody understands where to start because the data is so much scattered and you have to deploy so many, it is resource intensive, you have to have maybe proper tools to collect that data. So everybody, the larger companies, they are pushing their sub-suppliers, that is where it is happening. But with respect to the overall ecosystem, there have to be some policy, some guidelines which define the baseline. This is where we start. This is how you're going to build upon this. And then traceability, how are you tracing all those things? So from that perspective, there has to be some nodal agency which needs to be working on. India, what is happening right now is, particularly in Scope 3, if the customer is asking, yeah, you are doing that. Maybe if Coca-Cola is asking their bottlers, come to us, okay, yes, you do it for us, please, because they would not buy from us otherwise. So it's a compulsion. So unless and otherwise, there are some policies defining some baseline, that is not going to happen.
Absolutely. Customer is the driving force in many of these initiatives. What about you, Mr. Kiran? What do you reckon?
Really helps a clear-cut policy or a guidelines. For example, like a CBCB, they have come up with co-processing facilities. Now, earlier, very few companies, they used to get sent to cement industry as a co-processing kind of thing. Now, many pharma companies or many other companies also, they are sending. A clear-cut guideline definitely will help, and the smaller industries also, definitely they'll take it up in a right way, and things will improve.
Absolutely. Let me take the concluding remarks from here on, as we know we are running short of time. Mr. Pherwani, what do you think should be the way forward for the India Inc. to reduce carbon emission and specifically Scope 3 emissions?
For sure, regulatory requirements are required. I'm not sure how many of you are aware. Now we all of you are aware that our vehicles now are in BS6, right? And that's the most stringent engine which actually consume least fuel and emit least of the 1/10 of where we started 20 years back. When that can be achieved, and the pressure which is coming on the companies to produce engines which are safer, which are cleaner, and the more and more safety technologies are getting involved into it, it is possible just because of the regulation. So regulation for sure play a major role, number one. Number two, why the regulation is not coming in force? Because there are certain barriers. Because there is a huge cost involved into scope 3 in the value chain to bring the greenness. And that can only happen when you have an ecosystem also evolving around us. What if you go for 100% electrification of the car or a bike? You can. But if your electricity is still coming from a coal producing plant, it is not going to help into your scope 3 tailpipe emission. Similarly, there are certain hurdles which are there which need to be demystified before casting a strong regulation around it. But parallelly, the effort should be on capacity building, competency building, and that's where major corporates or private sector or PPP model has to come in picture to create center of excellence. Look at the way the agriculture is revolutionized and the way there are certain center of excellence. I'm not sure how many of you are aware. In India, there are 30 center of excellence related to agriculture technology. Even if we tap on it and do for a climate smart agriculture, thousands and millions of tons of carbon can be sequestered. So there are various ways and means which can be tapped. So that is the third way. Fourth, there are many startups who are coming, evolving and bringing technology tools for data collection, slicing, dicing the information and overlaying with ERP or SAP, where you can pull out the right information for even if it is a guesstimation. So these are certain aspects which need to be taken into account, and I put them into 3 buckets, which is people, process, technology. If all 3 are happening in parallel and it in sync, over a period of time, things will be in a better shape, and we can hope that we'll be able to contribute by 2040 in terms of greenness. And I'm pretty sure there are certain people who are able to create that center of excellence and show. There are corporates who are getting award. Last evening, you must have seen many of them have demonstrated that. And they should be the flag bearer and the torch bearer in terms of giving the knowledge and wisdom to many other partners over a period of time. And such type of platform are really acting like a lighthouse where many more people should look up to these type of recordings and see what they can do better. So that's something which I'm pretty hopeful, because I am on the side of the virgin saying that we are not at the path of destruction, but at this moment, if we don't add some value, or we say when we are part of the problem, we have to be the part of the solution also.
Absolutely. Hope is the way forward also. Here, Mr. Gurudanti, what's your closing remarks?
Yeah, I think I echo the overall sentiment of the panel, and as well as the sentiment of the people who are listening to us. The way which I see the reduction of scope 3 are just 3 ways. One is regulation. Driving regulation, having better policy is a mandate, but that's more of a hygiene feature. In India, we have seen regulation drives only so much. Beyond that, it goes tick boxing. Second is the cultural improvement, the improvement in the sustainability culture, behavior-based culture especially for the functions which are not directly related, like specifically for HR, finance, procurement. For scope 3, we need to have, as a sustainability team, we need to have dual business cases. If I make a RASI of any other sustainability initiative like scope 1 and 2 reduction or water reduction or waste management, generally in the RASI, the responsibility and accountability stays within the fence. But for scope 3, the RASI, the accountability goes outside the fence. So as the sustainability teams need to have dual business cases. One business case for procurement and finance to make sure that the initiative which we are driving has some amount of cost initiative, will reduce the TPRM risk. On the flip side, for the supplier also, the initiatives which we are proposing will reduce their costs, will improve their revenues. This carrots and sticks approach has to be followed so that we can use that approach appropriately depending upon kind of supplier, kind of procurement team, kind of finance team we are handling.
Absolutely. Mr. Singh?
A lot of things have been said, so I'll not repeat. So I'll just give an example. I think a lateral thinking is also what is important. As I think one of my fellow members mentioned that internal collaboration is also important. So I'll just give you one example. So I was having a discussion with my supply chain head in terms of defining a roadmap for our roadmap for the way forward. And he also echoed the same sentiment that we have hundreds and thousands of suppliers. It will be very difficult for us to track data or collect data. So me being from a audit and analytics background, so I think data is what speaks a lot of things. So when we analyze the data for suppliers, we concluded that most of the, basically there's a 80-20 materiality angle, right? When we analyze the data, it was concluded that most of our suppliers we are buying from materiality standpoint pertain to only 10 to 15% suppliers, which are contributing almost 70 to 80% of our active vendor database. So then we then he sort of got convinced this is doable. So I think when we have these discussions internally with the management, data helps, because with data you can actually plan for the road ahead, and there's a lot of positive thinking. If you probably go in a boardroom just talking that we need to collect scope 3 data from hundreds and thousands of suppliers, I think that the next milestone will be difficult to achieve. If you break down in pieces so as to call baby steps, a lot of things will fall into place. This is what actually I think the need of the hour is.
Dr. Panigrahi?
Yep. So, as I said earlier also, deploying a simple tool like a sustainable supply chain assessment questionnaire, and to understand, what is the extent to which supply chain contributes to your scope 3. I think understanding that is that will make your life easier, and also you can have a good sustainable supply chain. Second is, deploying a good tool if it is available. Today there are so many tools available, and one of my mentors was mentioning that he's compared, or he has done a matrix of 50 different tools, and you have to choose the right tool to see whether that can help you in understanding your supply chain and scope 3 overall. And also, I think it is important that we have a phase approach. Like, you can't cover, like for a company like us, nearly 1 lakh supply chain partners, you can't cover everybody in a single go. So maybe taking the top 10%, 20%, 30% approach would help a lot. Maybe in the next 5 to 10 years you can cover everybody. But again, you have to look at the speed or the timeline that is required by various frameworks, protocols, policies, various mandates. So I think there has to be some kind of synchronization between different external factors, internal factors, and then you can do it. Otherwise, 5 years down the line, we will be sitting here and discussing the same thing. Nothing will happen, right? So I think, although we all know it is very urgent and important, but a systematic approach would only help. Otherwise, things will go haywire. There will be a lot of chaotic situations and nothing will happen. At the end of the day, the CO2 concentration will go from 420 to 430 to 450 and 460. So nothing will happen. So I think a systematic approach by everybody, very, very highly collaborative approach would help a lot.
Mr. Verma?
So I too believe maybe awareness and sensitization is one of the most important thing. It should not only be the role of a CSO or maybe related team in the organization to work on, maybe consider it as just a reporting exercise and work on that. Ultimately, each and every employee within the organization, they have to be sensitized. Companies should adopt policies like, whether it is, say, carpooling, or whether it is incentivizing purchase of EVs, whether it is hybrid working, to work on how you can reduce the carbon emissions with respect to supply chain. Again, awareness. Companies used to have a budget with respect to training and educating their supply chain partners as well. And then maybe with a collaborative approach also. So all those things need to be practiced. And even as he just mentioned, so the incremental model of measurement is very critical. 80-20 principle applies everywhere. So I believe that 80% of your emissions through your supply chain would be happening through maybe 20-30% of your suppliers. So rather than worrying about attacking entire 100%, work on those 20%. So working on those 20% in next maybe 3, 4, 5 years, you can attempt at reducing their carbon emissions by maybe 50, 60, 70 and going down to net zero, your suppliers. So that's the right approach, incremental approach. If you try to solve the entire problem at once, I don't think it is possible. So probably by adapting all these things, I think there is definitely a future. And again, I mean, I believe everybody should believe that climate change is real. Yeah. As he just also mentioned, last 7-8 years have been the warmest years. Yeah. And it is going to happen. Yeah.
Systematic approach forward, yes. Mr. Kiran?
Yeah, this should be a part of the departmental metrics like SEM or something, and that should be monitored by CEO. I've seen like if it is monitored for the respective department, how many assessments they will do and how many capacity buildings they will conduct, at what frequency the shared best practices will be shared. So this kind of metrics will drive the respective organization, and in turn it will help or all the suppliers. There should be a monitoring and measurement in progress. So there should be a commitment. That's what I can say.
Absolutely, absolutely. Climate change is real, and as Mr. Pherwani said, part of the problem should be the part of the solution going forward, and hope is there. We all believe. With that, thank you all for joining us on this session. We'll not hold you back anymore for your lunch. Please enjoy it, and thank you again.